So this is a bit new, I think, for EM but we have a guest lecturer. This is Rekve Olafsson. He is from the University of the Faroe Islands. He's on a bit early from the schedule, but that will give us a bit more time at the other end, hopefully. So this is a 20-minute presentation from Rekve, and then afterwards, feel free to ask any questions. I'm sure he will be happy to answer them for you. So take it away.
Thank you. I had to find the new road when I came here. They just made a new road for the hotel. So luckily I was 20 minutes early. But then my reward for that is going on 15 minutes early. That's fine. It's nice to be here. It's a very interesting audience, as far as I've been told, where all these people are from. It's very interesting to be talking to you today. I am from, as she said, from the University of the Faroe Islands. I've been thinking about this topic for a few years, and I've also done some research, mainly in the form of a survey that we did on post-COVID perceptions in 2023. And the more I read about this, the more confused I get, I think, because what exactly am I looking at when I get some data on self-reported trust? And I seem to be more and more confused, but more and more fascinated by trust as a topic. So I'll be trying to get a little bit of what my impressions are of looking at this topic, and also trying to connect it to the time that we are living through right now, which is extremely well. It seems to be a period of cascading challenges or even crises. Turbulence, someone would call it. Just an initial overview. I hear that there are people from OECD in the room. There's a very good report from a few years back, 23, showing trust, and the Nordic countries are, which is what I've looked at, are somewhat above the OECD average. Here we have Denmark, we have Norway, Sweden over here, Finland is the highest, I think, yeah, and then Iceland is probably the only one lower than the OECD. And the Faroe Islands are a bit higher. I'll show you the numbers. So just to get some sort of overview, it's actually surprisingly low, the trust, because usually we hear about trust as, I mean, Nordic scholars have bragged about this trust, Nordic trust as the Nordic gold. But I mean, the Nordic countries are not performing that much better than all of the other countries in the OECD. But they are, although most of them are above the average. But what sort of implications does this new sort of... people keep talking about we're going into a new period with several different crises or cascading challenges. And there's a really good... I think I quite like this term, turbulence, which is of course borrowed from physics, but using it in political science, it becomes something like situations where events, demands, and support interact and change in highly variable, inconsistent, unexpected, or unpredictable ways. And this is a scholar from the University of California, Berkeley, who has written about this topic like this. And were previously stable structures, procedures, this is probably close. Budgets, technologies, or political environments become less and less stable. And this connects very well with trust. The famous German sociologist Niklas Luhmann termed trust as a complexity-reducing mechanism. So what happens when society becomes more turbulent, more unpredictable, more complex, etc.? What is the implication for trust? Or what is the implication of having high trust when you encounter such a period? That is another interesting question to ask. So trust is often viewed as a complexity-reducing mechanism. It's also reviewed as some sort of capacity or resource, almost like something that you can capitalize, I guess. You have money here and you have trust in society here, and you can use both as the foundation of resilience. Because if you use some very simple examples, you can quickly see that trust becomes like a reduction of all sorts of transaction costs throughout society. So if I, for example, have half an hour every morning to work, and I have to go through a crime-ridden neighborhood or something, then there will be all sorts of different thoughts going through my head. Exactly how do I do this? Do I go like a different route that takes longer, or what do I do? As opposed to having no crime in that area whatsoever, and I can just not think about it. So if you think about this, going through all these different events throughout society every day, trust becomes an extremely important resource, just in society in general, but certainly also for governance. So if I need to engage with a public institution or some sort of service provider and I have a high trust, it will probably, all else equal, make things easier, both for me and for the institution in question. And as that report that I mentioned earlier also indicates, trust, a low trust or continued low trust is the way that is written, damages social cohesion and political participation. So we're in civil society here. It limits government's ability to function effectively. So I guess we're in governance territory when we read that line there, and limits governance response to complex challenges. So it becomes much more difficult to govern through these types of periods that we are in right now. Whereas high trust supports compliance, collective action, and social cohesion. I will problematize that statement because I think it's a very difficult relationship between these things. Trust and compliance, for example, how do we measure this thing, this connection between these two things? Because practical compliance is very difficult to measure. You have to view people actually being compliant, and on the other hand, trust is this abstract attitude, right? So how exactly do you make the connection between those two things? And I think that's highly problematic. So yeah, and as I mentioned, the Nordics have often been termed the Nordic gold, or trust is a very high resource in the Nordic countries. So I apologize for this being quite small. Actually, you can't really see that well, but we did a survey in 2023. And we looked at trust in 6 of the Nordic countries, all of them except for Greenland. So all of the 5 nations plus the Faroe Islands, which is a semi-autonomous territory, obviously, in Denmark. And we got some quite interesting results, I think. We have this, I'm just assuming, because I'm talking to people who, most of them work in statistics agencies, that they know how to interpret a box plot. But in case there's someone in here who needs to refresh their memories, a box plot shows 50% of the observations within the box, and approximately 25% in the whiskers here. Don't ask me exactly why it's approximately, but it is approximately. and the median observation is the black line. So the left figure over here is trust in government by country, and we can see the Faroe Islands being the highest here, and Iceland being the lowest. And I'll explain why that's quite interesting finding, whereas the other ones are sort of in between. And trust in the public health authority by country, and this is COVID context. We need to think about COVID context. Generally, a higher trust in public health authority. Maybe this is very encouraging news for statistics agencies, which is probably sort of the same like expert kind of institution as a public health authority. And then we have a very sort of even trust level for general trust, just general trust in people, interpersonal trust, I think it's called usually. This is all self-reported, and this is about 5,800 observations throughout the Nordic countries. Interestingly, we have the Faroe Islands over at the very the top here, which is about between 400 and 500 observations. So that's enough, I guess. But at the same time, we have this very strange finding that we instead of just asking about trust, if we want to look at compliance or get closer to actually saying something about compliance, we also asked about very specific reasonableness attitudes. So in relation to specific COVID-19 measures, just to sort of try and get closer to this connection between trust on the one hand and the compliance on the other, and also to be able to say something more about actual governance legitimacy during a crisis. And a very important detail here is that this was made 13 months after COVID had ended, in the Faroe Islands at least. So this survey was conducted in 2023. Yeah. And the interesting finding that I'm talking about here is that the Nordic mean is the blue line, whereas the red line here is the Faroe Islands, and the Faroese mean is lower for each and every of these, I think they are 14 different COVID measures. And this is just very strange because according to this, the Faroe Islands have the highest trust. According to this, they have the lowest reasonableness for all of the different measures. And I just don't have an answer for exactly why that is. It just means that trust is not the only driver of compliance, or at least reasonableness attitudes. So I'm just sort of inserting that problem here, and I don't have an answer for it. I'm sorry. But there may be, we have a few theories, because I've looked probably more into detail into the Faroese data than the other countries. And we had other drivers at work during COVID. We had, for example, social control, which is an interesting mechanism in a very small society. And those have been actually researched also qualitatively through diaries and all sorts of things. And we also have, I guess, a very small society. So there may even be the case that even if you have high trust, you have, for some reason, this population has an easier time actually differentiating between, well, I can have high trust in the government here, but then I'm really unhappy about their measure here. I don't know if it's something in the culture or whether. It just means that we can't just say, if you say a 7 out of 10 for trust, then you say 7 out of 10 for some sort of measure that that institution has put in place. So we need to actually be very wary of that. Continuing on, we don't see that much going on with gender differences. In general, it just seems like the males are spread a little bit further down the scale. It's not that much to say. Whereas in terms of age, I think there's much more to talk about. When we talk about interpersonal trust, which is this one over here, we have an extremely even result for all of the different countries. No, for all of the different age groups. Sorry, this is not divided by country. This is the entire sample just divided by age groups. Whereas when we come to trust in public health authority, we have quite a large gap in the median here, and we have the same gap here. So we can, if we use this as sort of a control question, I guess, I think this is quite a significant result. And the first regression analyses also show that there are significant results between age groups. And I'll come back to why I think that may be a problem in the future. And then finally, we have, no, not finally, we have some reasonableness attitudes here as well. And I picked 3 of them. School closures, because that was quite a big one in many, many countries. Some would even say that was maybe one that actually infringed on some human rights for children. People have put that argument forward. A very vague but very common measure was social distancing. Everyone had that, I think. And then vaccination, which was quite controversial in many countries. And we have, I think all countries have, it's not controversial, but I guess all countries have a segment of the population that are really sort of against vaccinations. So I'm not exactly sure what we see here. I can't really observe much except for reasonableness closures in the Faroe Islands being higher here in terms of, yeah. So, continuing on, I tried to do try and put these 2 variables together also, trust and reasonableness, and we can see that it's somewhat explanatory here. If trust is the explanatory variable, predictor variable, and this is the outcome variable, but it isn't that clear-cut. But over here, when it comes to reasonableness of vaccination in relation to trust in the health authority, which keeps propagating vaccination as a very important tool, it seems to be more explanatory than school closures versus trust in government. There is something going on, but there are definitely other factors also in play. So, I don't know, there's a lot of problems here, because everything is self-reported. We don't know exactly how people interpret the questions, we don't know exactly if they answer the questions to the same degree, and we don't know if that self-reported trust exactly translates into practical compliance. It might do for some people, it might not do for others. So there's something to think about here. And also, how high should we aim in a democracy? Do we want 100% trust in the democracy? Yeah, I can see someone shaking their heads, because that sounds a little bit problematic as well. So we also need to think about other things like critical thinking. How much do we value that? And does a very high trust mean that we have lower critical thinking? And why exactly does it seem like in most of the cases the Faroese display higher trust but lower reasonableness attitudes? Don't know. And then there are all these other factors going on. Fear of the pandemic, a fear of the virus in this case, social isolation and social control, which were definitely very important factors in the Faroese case. So what do we want? Do we want compliance? Do we want accountability? So how high is the perfect sort of, where's the Goldilocks, I guess, Goldilocks level for trust? Do we want 70%? Or we had a former president of Yle in Finland, the public service media station in Finland, and she was confronted by some statistics that Yle had a little bit lower trust rating than some of the other public service media in the Nordic countries, and she replied very, I think, really interestingly, we don't want too high trust levels. We want people to not like us, because that's some sort of indicator for. So I mean, it's a bit of a opposite view, but obviously you can't go too low because you're obviously having a trouble there. But if you go up to 100%, then are you doing anything in terms of critical journalism in that case, right? So she wanted some sort of middle ground there. And we don't know exactly, we haven't really decided exactly where we want our trust to be. And I guess this is maybe an interesting question also for statistics agencies, right? I mean, obviously you want people to trust the numbers. What does it mean when they say they trust the statistics agency in a certain country? And when people are unhappy, is it because you're reporting the truth and some of the truth hurts? I don't know. So these are all, I guess, questions that are even more pertinent when you have crises or turbulent or uncertain times, I think. The age variable was definitely the one that we found was the most explanatory. So the older generations display far greater trust than the youngest generations. And I don't know if it's a context thing. You've probably ruined a lot of high school experiences for a lot of young people during COVID, because it was a crisis that severely reduced social contact. So there may be something very context related in terms of COVID, which might not be have the same effect in a different type of crisis. But if we look at age grouping, and we see this there in almost every time we look at trust, then the important question arises: is trust something that you learn with age, or do the younger generations keep the same trust level 10 years after, 10 years after, 10 years after, right? So it's this probably quite old discussion of formative period versus learning to trust. So is it the case that when you're between 18 and 25 years old, as some social psychologists say, you have this formative period where you really sort of embed some of your attitudes, and after that you just don't change very much. which would implicate that then your trust level at 25 will probably be the same as when it's 35 and 45. Right, so if we have this stair, then we get a bar chart that becomes lower and lower, right? Again, there are some studies, some longitudinal studies that show that people become a little bit more trusting with age, but I don't think that those results are so conclusive as to explain the that stair, right? So you will probably see a decrease in trust, as the OECD report also shows. So it shows a slight decrease from 2021 to 2023 in trust. Yeah, so we're going through this period now with simultaneous pressures or challenges: economic uncertainty, geopolitical tension, climate change, digital disruption, AI, I guess, it will probably be a big thing, combined with political polarization. And exactly what does this mean for all of these different things? And of course, the information environment, of which probably many of you are part, is having a big crisis at the moment with, I guess, just inundation of material. We have AI, we have social media, it's very difficult to find your place in an environment where things used to be so that the legacy media and the public institutions were the gatekeepers of information, and you were able to sort of be in a pool of very few communicating institutions, whereas today you are in a severe minority compared to just like the vast amounts of information. So it's very difficult to navigate this information environment compared to only 30 years ago. And several studies show that trust in legacy, at least in legacy media and government trust, probably ties into many institutions. So expert institutions like statistics agencies are probably quite likely to be close to the trust levels of media, legacy media institutions, or government trust. I really doubted if I should come with, any sort of quite concrete, here's my suggestions. I wanted to actually delete this slide, but anyway, I just kept it in. What exactly do you do as an institution in this environment? I think you should probably view trust as some sort of rough indicator of capacity and reach, also in an institutional sense. So if you have high trust as an institution, it is probably a benefit compared to having no trust. I mean, that is obvious. And communication is still key. I'm told there's a lot of communications people here. It is just absolutely crucial to provide trust. I did the survey on the official evaluation of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Faroe Islands, and that's one of the results, was that communication was absolutely essential to keeping people sort of in line, or trying to get people to do what they wanted to do. And this is me going maybe a little bit too sort of trying to think about solutions. But public outreach, obviously, keeping a service level and citizen participation was also something that the OECD report indicated as something that can actually boost trust. If you can get your citizens to participate in some way, not exactly sure how, you probably know how. But this is something that we think about. I'm also involved in the public service station here in the Faroe Islands, and we are trying to, on an institutional point of view, also to get to grips with how do we keep the trust levels, at least the form of trust that we want. Still critical thinking, but how do we keep it? And this keeps popping up as something that other public service institutions use a lot. I'm talking about media institutions. Finally, I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on, what are the implications of this? I guess you've been discussing it probably a little bit today, maybe over coffee, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts. So, ask questions, you can also comment. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rekla. Is there anyone who has a question or maybe a comment? Yeah, OECD, Jens, maybe you have some thoughts?
I expect it.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation and insights. So I'm coming from the OECD, and it's nice to see OECD data being used.
Always.
So it's one proof of trusting in what we are doing. My comment was more about who to trust, because you mentioned the health authority, you mentioned government. And we are looking here at statistical offices or organizations with this type of work. And probably when we talk about trust here, we talk about trust in our figures, the work that we are doing, not necessarily trust in the government, because the government is necessarily a political institution. So they have a political agenda. They are not necessarily representing the majority of the people. And so not the interest of all the people. So, but the statistical office, this should be completely neutral and should as less as possible influenced by a political agenda. Of course, it's unavoidable somewhere, but I think it's important to differentiate that, and maybe in the studies this could be highlighted. And maybe at the end, so you mentioned what can we do. How to get trust in our data and let citizens participate. Actually, it would be nice to understand how much are we already doing. So we say we are user-driven, so we work with users in order to get their needs. I think this is already very good, but of course the number of users that we reach is very tiny, and it has no impact on trust, I believe. But maybe there could be other initiatives, and maybe they exist, but I'm not aware about it, which is more, give us your feedback on what we are doing and make this information public. Say your people have proposed that we maybe do a new indicator on this or that. Maybe the young people who don't trust government because they don't do anything about climate change, maybe there needs to be more indicators about that, and so that people are informed about things that matter for them and not only what government would like you to do. Thank you.
Yeah. I think your first comment is very interesting. Surely there's. I think this is something that I clearly see from the literature, that there are groupings. So you can. It's not the whole political system as one big grey mass, but it is definitely civil servants, probably politicians, and maybe journalists. A little bit lower, but then you have the expert-driven institutions like statistics agencies and health experts. So there's like an expert group, and it's also something that we've seen in the Faroese data. What you mentioned later on was interesting as well, because we did a survey for the Faroese Public Service Station on trust, and we asked them what sort of media people use and what sort of media people trust. And there was an inverse relationship. So people, the youngest generation, they use our KVF, it's called the Public Service Station, least, but they trust us most. And the social media was, they used it most, but trusted least. So it doesn't necessarily equate to use. So you can have someone saying, oh, we really trust the OECD, but it's just not relevant for me. I'm never going to use the OECD, maybe someone from the younger generation. And that's also probably a challenge. So what exactly do you need? Do you need trust, or do you need to be relevant? You can have high trust, but be completely irrelevant to someone, right? It's very difficult to gauge exactly what we're talking about every time, I think. Yeah?
We had, yes, over here. This is from the German Statistical Office. Kirsten?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting presentation. We did a trust survey on social media recently. I will give a presentation on that tomorrow. And my concerns are that I think that we maybe overestimate communication a little bit, because communication is the second step, and of course you can help to avoid losing trust by communication, but the basis, and I think COVID-19 showed the problem, if people do not agree to what politics are deciding, then communication, of course, can maybe
damage
steer a
reduction.
little bit, but it's really it goes much deeper. Trust is not built by a good communication. It's because you do a
It's
good
not the
job.
foundation.
And we made the experience that if you, in terms you lose trust, then starts a political assessment of everything that you do, and that means if it's really hard to communicate decisions that are not done for political reasons. I guess it was a similar problem during COVID. So they did, I just say, often their best. But it was no other way to decide to have these decisions. But there is a gap. If you have no trust, then there is a gap between the formal methodological ideas and the needs, the methodological needs, and what people understand. And to fill this gap, I really don't have an idea, because it's too complex. Normal people don't understand, and I found it very interesting that you cited Luhmann, who said it's a reduction of complexity. And I mean, for the future, I think it's really a tough thing that I have no solution for that. Maybe you have an idea. I would be very glad. Just my comment. Okay, thank you.
Solution might be too ambitious, but I think it's very important to keep an eye on this thing. I mean, if it's suddenly going in the wrong direction, then you know something's going on. But exactly what is it and why is it going down? And then you need to probably go in and do other types of studies. And what do people mean by trust? So does the 18-year-old who's answering our survey and who just simply has maybe puts value in critical thinking and he says a 5 on our scale of 0 to 10, whereas a 60-year-old says 8. But in practice, they mean the same thing, right? I mean, I don't know if the generations are different also in the ways they interpret questions on trust. So there's all sorts of different things going on. I don't want to sort of disqualify everything, but this is definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. But you also really need to explain what you mean when you make these surveys.
Very interesting. Thomas, you have a comment or a question?
Well, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I'm from Switzerland. It's a relatively small society as well. I cannot explain fully the gap that you were showing between the government trust and the trust in these COVID measures. But as you see, we have the highest.
I was just going to say, I think Switzerland is one of the highest.
Yes, and it has not decreased during the pandemic. And why is that? I mean, there's some observations we have done, and this is because the government did not take measures. So the trust is still high in the government because we trusted them to not implement too many measures, to not do too many things on the federal level. So schools stayed open, we had no obligation to wear masks, we could go to transport without vaccination, travel, whatever. So it was all open, and I think this is what the people expected. So this confirmed actually their trust, and there's also in a small society a lot of trust in ourselves, in the neighbors, in the friends, in the office. I remember when COVID arrived in February, March 2020, there were only recommendations. So the government continued to give only recommendations in the country, and everybody did something and followed those recommendations. So we wear masks. I did not meet colleagues or friends anymore, and I think this worked well. And so there's maybe a link.
There's definitely
another link, and also maybe a different problem between the size of the population. So once it gets abstract, then it's a different problem with trust as well.
Yeah. Certainly, I mean, soft law or you said recommendations. We have this saying in Faroese, "Trúst eða mótrúst." How do you say pressure leads to counter pressure, I guess? So if you come out with very severe and very coercive measures, then you get, so there might actually have been some sort of trust boosting factor that you have this very soft or pastoral kind of governance, right? Yeah, that seems to be the case. That seems to have been the case here, and interesting to hear about the same happening in Switzerland.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Matt from Statistics Canada. I thought one of the questions I had for you about trust, we were discussing this earlier today. One of the things that we do as a statistical agency is that most of us have policies where we tell our audience when we make mistakes. And I'm wondering what you think about that and its effect on trust.
Well, it's transparency, right? I mean,
is that good or bad?
Yeah, that's a good question. Have you surveyed any of the impacts, or did you?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. Yeah, I'm at a loss. I don't know exactly. I would as a citizen personally commend that and probably have higher trust as a result of this, because I know how things work, and I know how it works. You don't always calculate everything 100% correctly,
exactly.
And then you have to be transparent on that. But I don't know if everyone would react in that way. We did a mistake also in the public service station once, KVF, and came out immediately and said, 3 months ago we did a survey and that was a mistake, here's the correct one. But we didn't measure the impact before and after. Yeah, we couldn't see differences we have this trust barometer going several times a year. We haven't seen an impact because of that. So, yeah.
And I think there was another question here from Mexico.
Thank you. INEGI in Mexico has a very good reputation and good high level of trust. Actually, it's just below the Army and the Navy, so it's like third rank. And it's not, the survey is not done by ourselves, but for a national university thing. But still, I think I have one hypothesis, and one the hypothesis is that we still conduct face-to-face surveys. So we are in close contact, and we also always say it's not our data, it's your data. It's the households data, it's the citizens' data, or it's the economic units data. It's not INEGI's data. We don't take the data from the internet. And whenever I said so, people smile, like, oh, that's true. They do agree, and so I think that is a driver for when people realizes that it's their data, that we are just constructing. It's a construct, and disseminating their own data. So that is something that I think is relevant. And the other thing is. When in your presentation, you at some point you said trust as a saving account with a very low interest rate, because you can lose trust and your bank account is zero. From one point to the other, without no interest rate whatsoever. So it's in a sense that is a difficult sort of example, because you always think a savings account as something that grows because of the interest rate. But here, it's just like hoarding money with no interest rate on the one hand. And finally, the idea of putting a lot of emphasis on trust without the right deliverance. So it's like continuous reminding people that you're there for their interest, not for the government's interest, not for the economic unit interest, but just for the sake of the national interest, in a sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's the point made by Germany Statistics that I don't think communication is foundational. I think probably distance or if you feel further removed from this institution. So your face-to-face example is really interesting, and also the one that you mentioned with being at you're being served, right? First and foremost, you're not there to do something for yourself. And that is also speaks to the same point, right? Distance, and probably the main reason for a lack of trust is increasing distance. We never see these people. They just put some newsletter out every once in a while, and they're just not relevant to us. And there's never a face to see. So that, yeah, I really believe that's the case. Communication is probably part of it as well. Yeah. And your second point, that was the first and third, but I can't remember the second one. The savings account, yeah. Obviously, this is a resource. It probably behaves differently than money, right? I mean, it's probably a silly example, but I mean, I think probably it's neglected as a resource. In the Faroe Islands, for example, we have an economic council. Is it called Economic Council? And there's a lot of focus on the money and the swings in the economy, and there's so much stuff going on, and the attention on this. And you're sort of neglecting this other resource, probably because it's too complicated, right? For all the reasons that we talked about today. But it's probably more important than the money, or at least as important, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, comments? Statistics Finland, Marco?
Yeah, one comment about your slides where you had the different level of things of younger people compared to older generation, and you said that we don't know if the levels go on steadily or they change when people grow older. Thinking about the thing that older people are using media, official media, and television and so on, but the younger generation are not anymore using this kind of media, maybe almost at all. And that is very worrying about of our statistical offices, because it's totally different in an environment where these younger generations are taking their news and following the things. Are we relevant anymore to younger generation as a statistical office? Do they know us? How do they know us if they are not reading and listening media?
Yeah.
They don't have this, according to Statistics Finland, this and that. The older generation hears this all the time.
Yeah.
How about the young ones?
I'm guessing if you ask the average 22-year-old in Finland, do you trust Statistics Finland, they would be very high on the scale. But do you read much of what they produce? They would be very low on the scale. So it becomes almost other questions. So it's almost like you're not talking about trust anymore. You're talking about relevance or something else, right? So the trust is okay, at least in Finland, I know, and also here, the trust is. I know people trust Statistics Faroe Islands, but is it relevant, or is it having an impact on policy and things like this? So. Yeah, there are other questions involved here than trust.
Yeah, I think we'll take one more question if there is one before we'll let you go and relax a little bit. Yeah, Martin, Slovenia.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I just have one comment regarding the OECD survey. I think that the general trust in the government in Slovenia is, you can see it on that slide, is very low, unfortunately. But I think there was another question, something like, to what extent do you trust the data provided by the government? And also the answer to that question was, the results for Slovenia were very low. So we started thinking, okay, what does that even mean? I mean, the data provided by the government, is this the official statistical data? Because every year we measure the trust in our data and the use of our data. And it's very high, actually. So it depends on the question. If you use the word government in Slovenia, it doesn't matter what the question is. It's going to be very low no matter what the question actually is. So
did they interpret that as data being orally sort of presented by politicians? Because then
I don't know. I don't have the answer.
So that might be the case.
Yeah, it could be, but. I mean, it depends.
But that's interesting because it's a standardized question for many countries, right?
Yeah. But I mean, like I said, if you ask about the government in Slovenia, they're the worst. They steal, they lie.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rekve. That was was very informative, and thank you for joining in on the discussions and questions.
Pleasure was mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Should we give him a round of applause? But I think those will be the last words for this week.